Hey everyone, welcome to Budapest. We're here in Hungary. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. I would say that this is perhaps one of the nicest cities, well, arguably the top two, along with Prague in Eastern Europe. Although I haven't been to Russia, so maybe there's something nice there. We're going to talk today about the subject of opportunities here and what kind of an environment it is, because it's a place that I think is growing in popularity as some of the traditional places like Cyprus become less popular. So let's just start with the idea of potentially opening a company here, okay? So it's fairly easy to open a company in Hungary. It's fairly easy for foreigners who own a company to open a bank account here. The banks here are quite good, actually. Just a few minutes, I don't know, maybe an hour ago, I finished having lunch with a bunch of different people, and we had conversations about this and how strict the capital requirements are, how overcapitalized these banks are. It's actually creating problems for them, but on the other hand, it's good and they're profitable as well. And there's a bunch of things that mean that there's a likelihood that over time, their profitability will be fairly solid. So we like all of this. They're also open to people from countries such as Ukraine, which is helpful because a lot of places will not allow that. So that's great. I would say that their banking here is, fairly good quality, and it's likely to improve over time. There's a lot of kind of this move of e-money, etc., which is coming into the area, and they're quite aware of that and being quite adaptive. So for example, right now they're bringing in a set of rules that require that they have a very fast settlement system, 3 seconds apparently. And so there's all sorts of really interesting things happening in terms of the evolution of banking, in this part of the world in general. So that's something that's quite interesting. Now, if you were to form a company, what's your consequences? Well, a local company, the base national tax rate is 9%, which is the lowest in Europe, actually. So that's pretty good. Now, granted, there's places that you could be non-resident, and there's some fancy tricks in Malta and things like this. So it doesn't necessarily, those could be competitive as well. But the difference is that it's actually functional to do business here. Now, there is some municipal taxes depending on where you're formed, but you can set up the company in some areas where you don't have those, although there's some nuances of making sure that you can potentially attract some additional attention, etc. So that's something that's pretty interesting. Their VAT here is not nice. It's like 27% or something. So that's not so great. Payment processing here is so-so. So you're part of the EEA, you get access to a lot of the providers. But for example, companies like Stripe are not in Hungary. Okay, so those are not an option for you. In terms of if you were to come and live here, the personal taxes are not amazing, okay? And we should note as well, say you were a foreigner and you wanted to set up a Hungarian company. If you were to just own it directly, when you pay out dividends, you're subject to a 15% withholding tax, which is quite high unless it's reduced under a tax treaty. So you would have 9%, and then after that you have an additional 15%. So then it's not so competitive. The way around that is that there's no withholding if the payment is made to a legal entity rather than an individual. So this is kind of a good place where you'd say have an operating company. There's almost 10 million people in Hungary, reasonable access to talent, right? Wages are still fairly low. And so you could potentially set up a team here, set up an office here, etc., and take advantage of the benefits that come along. And then you would potentially leave the money in the company, or if you were to pay out dividends to a holding company somewhere else that would have a participation exemption, you wouldn't have to worry about withholdings on the Hungarian side. Again, if you owned it directly, you would, right? Then it's not a very good option. So that's something that's definitely worth considering. They've cracked down a little bit more of late on corporate expenses. So just like I've probably mentioned in some of the other videos, if you're doing it in a place such as Bulgaria, you're going to have to, it's like, okay, great, you have a low tax rate, but the write-offs are not necessarily amazing. Here, it's not like Denmark or Netherlands where, it's horrible and they're very, very strict. But on the other hand, it's starting to become tighter in terms of what you can run through as a business expense. So something worth considering. Now, beyond that, there's a pretty vibrant economy in Hungary right now. There's been really great real estate growth. I would say probably in this region, it's second to Prague. I'd have to check the figures. Maybe there's some others that are competitive, but in general, it's been very good as a place to go. And so you'd have to do an assessment and say, at this point in time, cap rates are not going to be amazing, right? You're generally not going to have the same opportunities that you had, say, 10 years ago when it was amazing. But potentially there's still some good opportunities for capital appreciation if you can choose the right properties. It's still quite a bit cheaper than, say, places like Vienna, right? So this is kind of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, so we sometimes compare Vienna and Budapest, and they have a lot of people who go back and forth for business and things like this. In terms of cost, it's definitely less expensive here. Like, I would say that generally quality of life in Budapest is pretty good. It's a city that works pretty well. People are pretty nice. Generally, there's a lot of English spoken here. The food scene is great. There's, I think, 5 Michelin stars here, something like 3 1-star restaurants and 1 2-star restaurant. A lot of other good food in general. It's a really mixed cuisine because you had this interesting intersection of Germanic, Turkish, and kind of like Italian French cuisine in the area. So it's created a pretty unique offering in terms of the food. I'm a food guy, so I love it. I think that's fantastic. What else can I tell you about it? So if you were to actually come and live here, it used to be, a number of years ago, they had a really good permanent residency scheme. They've shut that down. Citizenship by investment is, there's no official scheme, and unofficial schemes are very expensive. So it's typically not a good option for people in that regard. However, and they're not very welcoming. It's not a very pro-immigration country. Okay, let's put it that way. So there are schemes that you can come under certain circumstances and get residency here, and it's okay. What a lot of people will tell you is, all right, the personal taxes are fairly high. They're not outrageous. We're not talking about Sweden or something like that. But by the time you add up personal and corporate, there's no reduced rates for dividends in Hungary, so you're going to have an overall tax rate that's going to be added together, and so that makes it okay, right? It's not great, not terrible, as we would sometimes say. So yeah, I think that it's a place that we're increasingly looking at for companies that want to set up and operate. They want to find some place to put an operating company. Because, like I said, the corporate tax rates are quite low. That's very useful. You have access to European financial infrastructure. Banks are very solid. I would definitely say they're good. The banker that we just had lunch, or one of the bankers we just had lunch with, said, hey, yeah, you can open bank accounts for foreign companies, etc. It depends, right? That was a very high-level banker, and so it depends a little bit on the situation, but it's a possibility, right? It's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that you could open an account, especially if the company is larger, better established, etc. If you were to say set up a PSP, then there's a lot of support for those types of businesses at banks such as Raiffeisen, so that's great. And so in addition, you could get licenses here, although they're pretty hard. So if we were to compare like Lithuania, they're giving a lot of licenses fairly easy. That's not the case here for sure. It's definitely a more challenging environment, but still interesting to look at. There's some good investment opportunities here in terms of ability to earn fairly high interest. We're doing some investing here, and yeah, so I would say, first of all, come and visit just because it's a beautiful city and there's lots to see, and that's great. I find the Hungarian people to be very welcoming and wonderful. It is known for quite a bit of corruption. I think it's rated as the most corrupt country in the EU, which has got a pro and a con to it, I guess. Quite business friendly, I would say. Probably one of the most business friendly in the region. Like I said, pretty easy to get set up, not too expensive, not too lengthy, good banking that can be set up quite quickly. And then in addition to that, relatively low taxes, provided you're not talking about personal taxes, you're just talking about business taxes, like I said, lowest in Europe, pretty well, depending on how big the company is and all these kinds of things, because obviously San Marino has a bit lower if you're talking about small business. But if you're not talking about small business, it's very, very competitive rates. And this is kind of a gateway in terms of a lot of things come in from China into Europe through Hungary. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity and definitely worth visiting, definitely worth checking out. If you're looking at places to invest, it might be worth looking at. That being said, be aware that the market has been on the rise for quite a while now. So like a lot of the world, you're in a situation where we're not sure exactly how long that will sustain. So anyway, if you're interested in more information, if you want help with companies, bank accounts, connections in the country, etc., reach out to us, and I will see you guys on the next video.